So now I've decided the garden bench is for me. I'm gonna make me one of these. So the question is, where do I start? Well, a good position to be in is deciding which lumber you want to use. And you don't have to worry about that because that's taken care of for you. But a typical application of this project could be some cypress which weathers very well outside. A better choice for us is a simple 2x4. Believe it or not, Douglas fir, which is what our 2x4s are usually made from, weathers very well outside. So I chose a typical 2x4, and from our first little lesson, I already mentioned to you that it's really not 2 inches thick, 4 inches wide. It's really 1.5 inches by 3.5 inches. And my particular board that I selected is 8 feet long. So I'm gonna begin making one of these from one of these. So obviously you can see it's a heck of a lot longer than it has to be. So I have to start cutting these down into the pieces that I want to make that put this project together. Philosophy that I always like to use is that I want to try to get this project as freestanding as I possibly can, as soon as I possibly can. So when I look at this, these top pieces here, and there are 3 of them, if I cut these pieces, they'll be left for probably 4 or 5 weeks before I ever touch them. If I cut those to size, route them, sand them up, they're just going to be sitting in a cabinet or some kind of storage where they can get dinged, dented, or probably lost. So where I want to begin is really to get this thing standing, and that's the legs. I'm going to begin by starting to machine these 4 legs that make up the project. And to do that, cutting down my 2x4 makes sense if I did it on this machine right here, which is called a miter saw. If you hear the term miter saw, M-I-T-E-R, miter refers to any angle, and it could be a 90-degree angle, could be a 45, 22.5-degree miter. It doesn't matter what angle it is, it's just a saw that allows you to cut pieces and cross-cut pieces to whatever angle you would like them to be. And of course, in here, we always like using squares or 90 degrees to something. Another common referred term to this machine would be a chop saw, simply because of the way it cuts. But if I bring the saw down, you notice that the blade gets exposed, the guard retracts, and allows me to bring a saw blade through a piece of wood going across the grain. I never want to use the miter saw to cut along the grain. I always want to use the miter saw to cut across the grain. So believe it or not, what I'm going to do when I refer to my bill of materials is to take this entry as a leg, and I'm going to cut this to 15 inches, which is what it says on my bill of materials. Out of this board, I plan to get all 4 legs, and I want to cut them to 15 in length here, but then take those pieces, I'm going to go over to the table saw. The table saw is my machine that I use exclusively for ripping or cutting along the grain. So the first process we're going to do is called cross-cutting. I'll cut this piece to the size it has to be. Then I'll go over to the table saw, I'll rip it to the width it has to be. The finished cut width, as the thickness, both have to be 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches. So let me start over here by moving my garden bench away and introducing you to the basics of this machine. First of all, I already stressed that you want to use this for cross-cutting. The second thing we always want to do is to realize whenever we're working with sharp tools moving at high speeds, you want to make sure that you take care of you first, because the most important thing with this whole garden bench process is that you come out of here with the same number of eyes, fingers, and toes that you started with. So we'll always talk about safety and always talk about things that I've experienced that will hopefully prevent you from experiencing the same. So if I look at this machine, like I mentioned to you, I have the handle of the saw, and I'm going to simply bring the saw down through the piece of wood, which is going to cut it to a certain size. Before I actually do the cutting, I want to examine the material that I'm working with. Number one, I noticed on this particular board, and of course I'm always going to choose the lousiest piece, that there's a pretty severe split on this side. Also, I noticed the 15-inch piece that I'm going to cut would include a pretty big knot on this side and a pretty big knot on this side. So to prevent that from happening and to give it to a lesser person, I'm going to use this end. I'll switch this around. I noticed that this board on this end and the grain look a lot cleaner than that side. So I'm going to make a wise choice here, and I'm going to make a cut from this end 15 inches. But keeping in mind, I actually need 4 legs, but in order to get that with these pieces 3.5 inches wide, I'm actually going to cut 2 pieces 15 inches in length. So when I do this, the first cut that I make, will it be 15 inches? To tell you the truth, it's not going to be. Because of this. If I look at a simple end on these boards, all of them usually look like that. They're wax coated, maybe have some ID tag on it, but this end does not look very clean to me. What I'd like to do is to take this and make this an exact 90-degree cut, and then take my measurement from that 90-degree cut that I've made, 15 inches, and cut my 2 pieces that size. So before I do anything, I'm going to make sure that my edges are machined, which they are. They're parallel to each other, which they are. They're touchable, which they are. So by putting that edge up against this guide, which is referred to as a fence, set up exactly 90 degrees to that blade, I can make a cut that's going to come out exactly square. So let's give this a shot. I'm going to take my 2x4, I'm going to slide this over, and remember the first cut that I'm going to make, I'm just going to take a hair off to clean it up. I can't go over every single detail about this machine, so when I do this, I'm really going to give you guys enough information to safely get by and sort of understand what it is we're going to do. Because 6 weeks is not a whole lot of time to make this project and to go over every piece of equipment. So the miter saw simply turns on by squeezing the handle. This happens to be a DeWalt miter saw. Many of them are very similar, where the handle includes the on-off switch. If I take the handle and squeeze it, you can obviously hear that the blade is spinning and there's a lot going on. I'm going to take the saw, make sure my board stays up against my fence by using my left hand, and bring my right hand down through the path of that board and allow it to cut at exactly 90 degrees. Now I want to take off very little, a term we use called squaring an end. When we square an end, and it's all written by this poster here, we're taking off an absolute hair from this board, something that I can measure from. I just want a point that I can measure from. So I'll take the board up against the fence. Now, unfortunately, if you're a lefty, these machines were not meant for you. If you think about all this piece of equipment in this shop, they're all geared toward right-handed people. The table saw is geared toward a right-handed person. The drill press that you're going to use will bring the drill down, but it has the handle on the right-hand side. So it further complicates. If I'm a lefty, I have to become a righty on this. Also, I built an extensive table here, so we want to make sure that the majority of our 2x4 is resting on that table safely. So left hand, my right hand on the top. I'm going to move the board so it's about in the middle of this groove on this saw, and I'm going to turn and bring the saw down. I hold on to it and keep it down until it comes to a complete stop, only because it's a lot safer. And if I now compare the end that I just cut you'll see a real nice clean end compared to the end that I started with. The next thing I'm going to do on this board is to measure it out to the exact length that it has to be, which happens to be 15 inches. So, 3 little things that I need: a tape measure, a tri-square, which is my guide at exactly 90 degrees. If I take this tri-square and put it up against any machined edge, when I put it up against here, I get an exact 90-degree angle to these machined edges. So I'm going to take my tape measure, put it on the very end that I squared. Always put it up against the squared end. I'm going to put a mark at 15 inches. I'm going to take a tri-square, butt it up against the machined edge, and I'm going to draw a line to the length that this board has to be cut to. So if you look, here's my line, and I'm going to cut 2 pieces this size. And this is really kind of an important thing. If I asked you, where do you cut to be accurate at 15 degrees, you not ever cut on a line. We're not going to cut on this line, we're actually going to cut to the line. So instead of the saw blade right in the middle of this line, we actually want the edge of the saw blade to the waist side of the line. I'm going to take the saw blade and make sure it stays to this side of the line as opposed to cutting the line off, because if that line disappears, my piece is less than 15 inches. I'm going to take my board, which I had before, and now I'm going to slide this over and bring my saw down to see how accurate I am to this saw blade just barely touching that line. Now here's another important thing. I need 2 pieces this size. So what is the probability of you measuring out one, cutting it, measuring out another one to 15 inches, cutting it, and having it exactly the same length? We're humans. I'm going to tell you right now, I can't do it. Very few people I know can cut it exactly the same length, which is a huge concept in this shop. I've learned over the years that it's many times more important to measure and cut things to the exact same length as opposed to it has to be this exact length. It's more important that things are the same as opposed to they're exactly the same, specified length that it says on my bill of materials. So if I cut one piece to 15 inches, I cut another piece to 15 inches, I'm golden. But if I cut one piece at 15 and make another one 14 and 7/8, my legs and my joints are not going to line up. So when I do this, I have to have some kind of foolproof method of making sure that these are exactly the same length. And believe it or not, folks, after many years, we've come up with something. And it's the simplest little thing that you can use. I call this a stop. It's a little piece of wood that I use that I can place on the fence, slide this over to the exact length of my piece, and use this as a guide. I can cut 222, 222, 2022 pieces, and as long as the squared end butts up against that stop, they will all be exactly 100% on the money, perfect, the same exact length. So I introduce you to the stop, and now what I'm going to do is take this, slide this over so that my saw blade comes to my waist side of the line, and at that point, I'm going to take my stop and place it right up against the fence. I'm going to tighten this up. And the critical thing here is that when I make this cut, I'm actually holding what's in between the stop and the blade. So now, the righty Shimko becomes the lefty Shimko, because I'm going to slide my position over to the right-hand side of the saw blade. I'm going to take my right hand, which I used on the handle the first time, and I'm going to switch it to where it's holding my board. My left hand, which was holding my stock, is now actually going to be on the on-off handle position. So by cutting this piece, sliding this board over, since I'll have a squared end cut, I can actually cut my both pieces. They will be exactly the same length. So let's try this. Right hand on my stock, and make sure I keep my wood up against that stock. Rather than pass this through in one pass, I always like to go easy. It's easier on the blade, it's easier on the stock. Sometimes you'll get burn marks if you just try to push it all the way through. But by taking that easy, I think I have better success. So I have one piece this length, and guess what I did? Almost purposely. I cut off my line. I can't see my line. I made a mistake. This piece is shorter than what it has to be. Uh-oh. Is there a problem? No, there is no problem. Because all I have to do is slide my board over, touch the stop, and without even measuring, I'm going to get two pieces that will be exactly the same length. And it really doesn't matter that these are less than 15 inches. Let me make my second cut. Same exact way. Oh, by the way, safety glasses, absolutely. Sleeves rolled up, absolutely. And eyes fixated on your material that you're going to cut. I slide over again to the right-hand side, since I'm keeping what's between the stop and the blade, and I'm going to make a cut here. So without measuring, I can take these two pieces, place this right on my table, and note that these are exactly the same length. So yeah, it mattered that these are 15 inches, but if they're a little bit short or a little bit long, it doesn't really matter, just as long as they're the same. The next thing that I'm about to do is to head over to the table saw, which is where I'm going to take these pieces, which are 15 inches long, and make them 1.5 inches wide. I'll set the fence on the table saw, and I'm going to rip this piece. So I'm going to get two pieces out of this, two pieces out of this, and I'll be in good shape to use the router table and route my legs and put a nice sharp rounded area on this, on each one of those corners. I hope this was informative. This is going to be our first operation that you will hopefully get done tomorrow evening, and will join us on the table saw later. Thank you.